what would Mother's Day be without a country song? So if you are a mother, or if you have a mother, happy Mother's Day. Changing as it flows, and the dreamer's just a vessel that must follow where it goes, trying to learn from what's behind you, never knowing what's in store, makes each day a constant battle, just to stay between the shores. And I will sail my vessel till the river runs dry, like a bird upon the wind. These waters are my sky. I'll never reach my destination if I never try. So I will sail my vessel till the river runs dry. Too many times we stand aside, let the water slip away. What we put off till tomorrow has now become today. So don't you sit upon the shoreline and say you're satisfied. Choose to chance the rapids and dare to dance and ride. Yes, I will sail my vessel till the river runs dry, like a bird upon the these waters are my sky. I'll never reach my destination if I never try. So I will sail my vessel till the river runs dry. Yes, I will sail my vessel till the river runs dry. Till the river runs dry.
No? Okay. Well, I was hoping we could. I was talking to my mother yesterday, and she said where she lives, the tradition is to have an Elvis impersonator for Mother's Day. I wasn't quite sure how that all goes together, but anyway. So welcome. We're so glad you're here today. Right in the pew pocket in front of you, you should find a little blue card. I think Mike has one right here somewhere. Yes, hold that up. There we go. Little blue card. If you would let us know your attendance on one side, let us know your prayer requests on the other. That would be wonderful. Since it is Mother's Day, I was handed this by Pat Hastings this morning, and it is a poem that was written by our own Bud Beamer, who has been very instrumental, he and Beth Ann, in getting the Mountain Star Relief Nursery started in Madras. And if you didn't know, this last week was their big fundraiser. I was thinking that we should hire Kayla for this fundraiser just to do ours every year, because she was so organized. But what a wonderful organization. So I just want to, in honor of that and in Mother's Day, wanted to read this morning. Their hungry eyes look and search for a face, and eyes that look back at them, looking back. Eyes connect, and a soul is filled with a surge of warmth and excitement, unmatched by food or other comforts. If only each and every baby would find this source of caring eyes, and a face that smiles, and a voice that sings, Would not her face be full of smiles and her precious mind thrive and grow to do good things? The eyes of a parent whose mind is preoccupied may look but not truly see this baby or be received in such a way. And losing this opportunity, a baby's precious life is changed, and who she was to be is but a ghost that follows her now lesser life. There is that time so critical and urgent that hungry eyes and growing minds will reflect and thrive, and then this time will cease. Let us be aware, and let us care to act, support, and advocate for those who have no voice and whose life in some way will affect us all. So, thank you, Bud, for that this morning. There's probably something else I was going to say. I can't remember what I was. Oh, how many of you were born? Anybody here who was actually born? Okay, most of you were hatched, apparently.
Yeah.
Okay, just checking, because that means that in some way a mother touched your life. No, not where, but were you? Okay, Marilyn was not born, apparently. She just appeared. No. All right, so I always say that because I know Mother's Day is a weird holiday in many ways. If you saw my email yesterday, you'll know that, we kind of try to figure out what in the world this whole Mother's Day thing is about. It's a really big thing in our culture. It's not a holy day, but it might as well be. Did you know that this year we will cross the $23 billion mark just in the U.S. for how much is spent on Mother's Day? So on this day, because it is a big deal, we're going to celebrate it here. So I don't care if you were a mother, you had one. You were born. And because all of us were born and all of us are here, whether male or female or Greek or Gentile or whatever, we're here. We're going to celebrate what it means to be helpers in this world. So we are so glad that you're here this morning. Make sure and fill these out. And would you, please stand for our greeting word. Okay, going to be like that this morning, apparently. Okay. God loves us. God cares for us.
God blesses us. God tends to us.
Is that it? No, I thought there was more. Oh, there it is. We are God's precious fruit. God hears us. God helps us. God trusts us. Sometimes we are more faulty than precious fruit. But no matter what, we are God's. May the peace of Christ be with you.
And also with you.
Would you greet one another? Good morning, Dorothy. Blessings. What? Yes. Good morning. How's your sweetheart doing today?
Sorry, keep it up with
Oh, no.
Anyway, we got an antibiotic.
Okay.
Getting better.
Good, good, good. Christ be with you. Carrie, Christ be with you. Good morning. Thank you. You too. Hello. Good to see you. Thank you. Happy Mother's Day. Hello. How are you? Good to see you.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm good. Thank
Look at this cute hairdo we got going here. It's very cute. I like it. Happy Mother's Day. We'll talk after. Okay. No, it's not working. That's not good. Blah, 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 blah.
Let's walk together for a while, and that's where we begin to build a world
this morning, as we enter into worship together, let us just take a few moments to bring ourselves into the present moment, to rest in God's presence and enjoy the presence of one another in Christ. Let us go to our God in silence. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, a beautiful day in the beauty wood. Would you be mine? Would you be mine? Would you be my neighbor? So 50 years ago, Mr. Rogers, who had an easier sweater to put on than this, began his show on public television. And I've been thinking a lot about him, and you'll notice that there's a quote from Mr. Rogers in our bulletin today. And when I got to thinking about today being Mother's Day and how important it is to think about all the people who are mothers in our lives, you know, the nurturers, the carers, the kind people, the people that are the helpers, who else would I think of besides Mr. Rogers? Now, as far as I know, Mr. Rogers was not a mother. Actually, he was married and he had 2 sons of his own who probably spent their entire lives trying to figure out how to be the sons of Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers is also somebody who often was made fun of in the media in many ways because he had this soft, gentle speaking voice. And if you were a mother in the 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s, you might have thought, if a child turns on Mr. Rogers one more time, because there was something that unless you were sitting there and really receiving it, sometimes Mr. Rogers was a little bit too much, at least for me when I had a busy motherhood life. But this morning we're going to, in our sermon in a nutshell, I want to share with you one of Mr. Rogers' quotes that I think is really important for us today.
You know, my mother used to say, a long time ago, whenever there would be any really catastrophe that was in the movies or on the air, she would say, always look for the helpers. There will always be helpers, you know, even just on the sidelines. That's why I think that if news programs could make a conscious effort of showing rescue teams, of showing medical people, anybody who is coming into a place where there's a tragedy, to be sure that they include that. Because if you look for the helpers, you'll know that there's hope.
Let us join in our invitation to prayer. Make us one, and as the ushers pick up our prayer requests.
one, Lord, make us one. Holy Spirit, make us one. And your love flows so the world will know we are one with you.
So this morning, I was wondering if you had particular nurturers, kind people, helpers that you would like to lift in prayer today. Are there helpers that you want to lift in prayer today? That you're Rob Hastings, helper, the kind people? Yes, Larry. They did. We watched it all on Facebook. It was great. They did an awesome job. Just when you were giving up on your flowers and your garden, here they came to build a fence so that the deer could not eat everything. So what a blessing. What a blessing. Those are the helpers. We could pass them around, Larry. I think that'd be great. Other people who have been the people who have helped shape our lives this morning.
School counselors?
School counselors, absolutely. Our teachers, definitely. Those first responders. Yes, isn't this just gorgeous this morning? Just lovely. Farm workers, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you, dear. Yes, relief workers around the world. So often we don't even hear their stories unless something really horrible happens. But they are there every single day.
My crisis teams that I send in whenever there's a death of a staff or student or a big shooting or whatever, they do a tremendous job.
The crisis teams. Absolutely. The white helmets, absolutely. They go in where there's just not enough help of any kind and do heroic work every day. Terry? Yes, the news teams that travel all over the world in terribly dangerous situations so that we know what's happening in the world. Yeah, the Jefferson County Library staff, they are there not just for the people who are necessarily always there to use the library, but just people who need help and who need a place to be. Absolutely. Absolutely. Others. There are so many. And today I hope that we're going to take a little time later in the service for you to put that into a prayer. But for right now, here are some of our prayers. Continued prayers for Nancy Collins. Prayers for those who are suffering privately and in silence.
Patty Winterroad, former prisoner who has plasma cell leukemia, who didn't have chemo treatment Saturday, and hopefully she will have stem cell and plasma on Monday.
Be praying for Patty. Also for the people on the Big Island of Hawaii as they are watching their neighborhoods disappear and not knowing whether or not they'll ever be able to go back. For them, for people that are in, there's been another shooting and stabbing in Paris overnight. people of Gaza. There's so many troubled places in the world. So it's a good day for us to remember all of those who are running toward rather than running away when there's dangers and catastrophes. Let us go to our God in prayer. God of love and creativity and compassion, we give you thanks for those people who are called to run in the direction that most of us would never even think of going. They move toward the child that is difficult. They move toward the catastrophe along the road. They fly helicopters. They drive ambulances and fire trucks. They stand in front of classrooms. They work in emergency rooms. Oh God, today we give you thanks for all the helpers. We thank you that on this day when we honor mothers, we do so not just reflecting how very blessed so many of us have been to have those nurturing, loving, unconditional people in our lives. But we also know, oh God, that you are that for us as well. Even when we are disappointed in our relationships, when we are sorrowing and grieving, when we are angry and frustrated in the world, that you are for us both mother and father, sister and brother, friend and guide. We know, oh God, that for a child to develop normally, those first 3 years of life are so vital that nearly 90% of who they will become is formed. And when we remember things like that, we recognize that mothering, nurturing, unconditional presence is something that we are all called to do and to be. We don't always get it right. Sometimes we back away thinking there's just too much need in the world. But in these moments, oh God, when the world needs kindness and hope and civility and gentleness, let us be your people in this place. We pray for all those who are suffering, whether that suffering is self-inflicted or from external sources, or because the world sometimes is just a confusing, messy place. We pray for those whose stories we know, and for those whose pain and whose stories we will never know, because we are all together, O God, your children. Bless us in these moments. Hold us in the palm of your hand and grant us peace. In the name of the Christ who invited us to pray, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Come and fill our hearts with your peace. You alone, O Lord, are holy. Come and fill our hearts with your peace. Hallelujah.
Now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. So the United States has been celebrating officially Mother's Day since about 1914. It was a movement that was started, at least legally, by a woman named Reeves, excuse me. And what she wanted to be able to do was to honor her mother, the kind of mother that she thought that everyone deserved to have. And she didn't want it to be mothers in plural. She wanted it to be everybody taking time to be with their family to celebrate their moms. It was a really noble gesture, and Woodrow Wilson signed it into law. But the impulse to celebrate mothers has been around a lot longer than that. In fact, Julia Ward Howe, who was the writer of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, back in the days just right after the Civil War, began listening to the terrible things that were happening in the world in terms of there just being one war after the other. And she joined a movement of women that were mothers for peace. And in those days, she wrote an appeal that was known later as Mother's Day Proclamation. And a few years later, she asked that we should celebrate every June the 2nd, a calling for the end of violence motivated by the recent devastation from the Civil War and from the Franco-Prussian War. For years, she organized things around those dates. And these are some of her words that were in her speech. Arise, all women who have hearts, whether your baptism be that of water or of tears. Say firmly, we will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies. Our husbands shall not come to us reeking with carnage for caresses and applause. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. We women of one country will be too tender of those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure others. Mother's Day. Not exactly what we do now. And yet I really don't have a problem with the fact, really, that this is the fourth largest day to get flowers in the universe. I don't mind if your kids bring you dandelions mixed with grass. I think that's terrific. If you can get breakfast in bed out of it, yay. Mother's Day can be a lot of fun. But on the other hand, I'm very aware, especially this time of year, of friends who just struggle, as I have struggled over the years. For children who don't come home, for a parent who is no longer in our midst, for people who have never given birth, maybe as a choice, but every single time Mother's Day comes around, there's a question of, well, why didn't you ever have children? You know, those kind of things. For the people who are infertile and unable to have children, for those who choose a different way of life, for people who are single and are happily single, for people who grieve for the world, for people who did not know love that was unconditional in their growing up years. There's all kinds of things that make this time of year a struggle for other people. So there's an easy way out of this. I could just say, okay, I'm not going to preach about this. And to tell you, I have to be honest, that there are a lot of years in my own life when I thought, maybe we can just pretend it's not happening. But I decided against that because if you know me by now, we're almost to a year point here, but you probably know by now that if there's something that makes me uncomfortable, I will probably preach about it. And Mother's Day is one of those times. And the reason for me personally to struggle with it is for one thing, it's really weird that we celebrate women in this spectacular way for one day, and then we still question whether or not women should be paid with men. Weird. We still have the struggle over whether or not it's important for women and girls not to have to put up with violence in the workspace. A conversation we are yet having. And yet on this day, we make it seem as if all mothers are saints. Well, they probably are. But then again, it's just this weird little sidestep we do in our culture of lifting up on a pedestal in one area and totally ignoring issues in the other. And the scripture for today is one that reminds me of this situation. We have Jesus giving what scholars call the farewell address. And I love the fact that in John portrays Jesus much more like me saying goodbye to children. Do you remember that first time when your kids were young and you were going to have to leave them overnight? Now, I don't know what you did, but the amount of paper that was written down on and placed in significant places where the person who was going to take care of my children could find it in an emergency. You know, the phone numbers, what they liked before bed, what their routine was, the jammies that had to be worn and no others. You know, that kind of note. And that's what I would do, especially that first couple of times when my kids, I had to go out of town and the kids were being taken care of by very generous, loving, capable people. But still, there was just this energy I had around making sure that everything that I could possibly say was said before I leave the house. And I kind of see Jesus as this in the Gospel of John. You know, Mark hardly says goodbye at all. Matthew and Luke have dinner. And Jesus spends chapter after chapter giving last-minute instructions. This Jesus I can relate to. You know, we have worked together, we have loved together, I have given you these instructions, I have given you everything I think you need to know, but before I go, let's just make sure you got it. So he gives these instructions, and just about the time when they've already done the foot washing and it's just about time to leave for the garden, Jesus stops everything right smack in the middle to pray. He doesn't pray with the disciples, he prays for them. And that touches my heart. It touches my heart because he's done everything he could possibly do, and the only thing left to do, even for Jesus, is to pray. And he prays that they will all be one, that they will understand all of the things that have gone on in these months and years previous, and that they would understand that now he was passing on to them the ability to go out and be helpers. To be helpers. In the chapter before this, it's a very long prayer, by the way. In chapter 16, part of the prayer, he says that, you know, I know that you're scared. He says this to the guys and to the women also who are gathered. And he says, I know that you're frightened, but I'm not going to leave you alone because I'm going to leave for you an advocate. And another translation says, I'm leaving with you a helper. And this helper will always be with you, will work alongside of you, and will remind you of all these things that we have done together. And you're going to be okay. Now, I mentioned earlier that when my kids were little, and when, especially when my oldest was little, we lived in Kansas City, Missouri, and PBS had Mr. Rogers on several times a day. And when you're busy, and I have to confess this, when I was busy and I would hear that very calm, gentle voice, it just made me nervous. Because it was like, I'm busy now, I can't sit down and be still. But isn't that the whole point of Mr. Rogers? The whole point was that when my children overstimulated and playing too hard and being overly tired, when they would sit down and watch Mr. Rogers, all was right with the world. Mr. Rogers had a way about him that taught something that we now call emotional intelligence. They didn't call it that back then. Emotional intelligence of letting children know that it's okay to have feelings, that it's okay sometimes to be angry and frightened, and that you know that there are people in the world that are trying to keep you safe. And he gave even small children hope, and harried moms who could sit down long enough with their 4-year-old to simply sit in the magic of Mr. Rogers. There are lots and lots of quotes. The one that we quoted this morning by Mr. Rogers himself about that whenever things are catastrophic and difficult, that you just need to look for the helpers in life. And sometimes they'll just be on the edges, but they're there. But he did more than just call out the helpers. He also did amazing things by teaching kids about things that scared them that nobody else was talking to them about. Like that fear you have when you're a small child and you see that drain and the water going down the drain, and somewhere in your 3-year-old or 4-year-old imagination, you can imagine if you get your toe stuck in there, that you're going to go down the drain. He talked about stuff like that. He didn't say, oh, that's silly. That'll happen. He spent an entire week one time going to a hospital and explaining to small children that it was going to be okay if they had to go to the hospital, and showing them the room and talking to the nurses and the doctors and the anesthesiologists and making that experience a safe one. He also did something really remarkable for its time. He tried to talk one of his friends named Francois Clemens into coming on his show and playing the neighborhood policeman. Now, this was in 1969. In 1969, just think in our own imaginations what all was going on in the world at that time. Mr. Clemens was African American. The idea of playing a policeman in that particular time period did not have any attraction for him, because policemen were dangerous if you're a black boy or a black man. Policemen would sick dogs on small children. They would take fire hoses and spray them when they were trying to work for integration. So he was really reluctant to do this. But Fred Rogers could be very persuasive in his very gentle way, which was, by the way, his voice all the time. It was who he never wanted to play a role for anyone. So he simply did the things on his show that he normally would do. When he went in his own house, he put his dress shoes and put them in the closet, and he put his comfortable shoes on. And he took off his suit jacket and he put on a homemade sweater that his mom gave him every single Christmas until she died. And that's what he did on his show. So he would come in and he'd be with the children, and he would do very simple things like feed the goldfish. He had a letter from a little girl one time who was blind. And because she was blind, she couldn't see that he was feeding the fish. And so she wanted to know if those fish got fed every single day, because she worried about them. And so he took the time on his show to say, yes, even if you don't see me feed the fish when we're together, they always get fed. Someone will always care for them, just as I want to make sure someone is always caring for you. So back to Mr. Clemens, he decided to take the role, and he also happened to have a wonderful singing voice, which if you're going to be on Mr. Rogers is not a bad idea. And one of the most poignant scenes that Mr. Rogers probably ever had in that era on his show was the day in which Mr. Clemens came in the neighborhood and was in Mr. Rogers' backyard, where Mr. Rogers was sitting, because it was a hot day, he was sitting in a chair with his feet sitting in a wading pool because it was hot. And he invited Mr. Clemens to take off his shoes and socks and sit with him, with his feet also in the pool. Black and white together. In a time period when mixed bathing in public swimming pools in many places was not allowed. And on top of that, when they got out of the pool, Fred Rogers, Presbyterian minister, educator, composer, teacher, author, knelt down and dried his feet. Now, he didn't preach the gospel in the same way we do when we come together here. He preached the gospel for that 50 years that he was active by just being kind and compassionate and just and comforting and trustworthy. And if I think about this particular day in our lives, I think about that maybe that's really why we celebrate Mother's Day. Because all of us need to know that there are some people, someone, even one person, whether it's a teacher or a friend or an Aunt Grace or a grandma or a mom or a dad or a grandfather or the next door neighbor. Whoever that person is, we need to have at least one person in our lives who is that for us. Francois Clemens wrote that he grew up in a ghetto. And I really had a hard time putting myself in the role. But when he finally came around to it, he says that he invited me to come over and rest my feet in the water with him. And then Fred Rogers not only was showing my brown skin in the tub with his white skin as two friends, but as I was getting out of that tub, he was helping me dry my feet. And he never forgot it. Fred Rogers, who said, "When I say it's you I like, I'm talking about that part of you that knows that life is far more than anything you can ever see, hear, or touch. That deep part of you that allows you to stand for those things without which humankind cannot survive. Love that conquers hate. Peace that rises triumphant over war, and justice that proves more powerful than greed." This week I watched a couple of his interviews on television, and it was really interesting that when he was interviewed for normal consumption television, like a late night talk show, or when he was to receive awards, as soon as he was introduced by the host, there would be nervous laughter in the audience. Because if you're a grown-up, you're not supposed to appreciate Mr. Rogers. And he often would acknowledge the fact that the audience was laughing. But in 1999, he was inducted into the Television Hall of Fame. And he said something that totally blew the audience away. These very sophisticated, well-dressed actors and actresses and other people in the entertainment industry. He said, "Fame is a four-letter word, and like tape or Zoom or face or pain or life or love, what ultimately matters is what we do with it. I feel that those of us in television are chosen to be servants. It doesn't matter what our particular job. We are chosen to help meet the deeper needs of those who watch and listen day and night." I don't think anybody had ever told them that. He goes on to say, last month, a 13-year-old boy abducted an 8-year-old girl, and when people asked him why, he said he learned about it on TV. Something different to try, he said. Life's cheap. What does it matter? He looked out on this audience of these sophisticated entertainers and said, well, life isn't cheap. It's the greatest mystery of any millennium, and television needs to do all it can to broadcast that, to show and tell what the good in life is all about. But how do we make goodness attractive? By doing whatever we can do to bring courage to those whose lives move near our own, by treating our neighbor at least as well as we treat ourselves, and allowing that to inform everything we produce. And then he made them really, really nervous. He said this: who in your life has been such a servant to you? Who has helped you love the good that grows within you? Let's just take 10 seconds to think of some of these people who have loved us and wanted what was best for us in life. Those who have encouraged us to become who we are tonight. Just 10 seconds of silence. I'll watch. I'll keep track. You can hear on the video, nervous laughter and rustling because they didn't believe he was going to do that. So he stood there on national television, live in those days, and watched his watch as everyone sat together in that auditorium in silence for 10 seconds. Let's do that now. No matter where they are, either here or in heaven, imagine how pleased those people must be to know that you thought of them right now. We all have only one life to live on earth, and through television or through life together, at the grocery store, at the doctor's office, on the back of a fire truck, we have the choice of encouraging others to demean this life or to cherish it in creative and imaginative ways. Who has been a servant to you? Who are you called to be a servant to? I really wasn't expecting to preach about Mr. Rogers today. It's Mother's Day. I probably should have chosen a girl. Yeah, his wife is great. But I have to say that even though most of the people in my life who have served as mentors, who have been my spiritual guides, who have been the moms in my life, even though most of those people have been women, I've got to say that Mr. Rogers probably was one of the best moms I ever knew. Beloved of God, happy Mother's Day. Amen. the gift of presence to one another in this place. So let us receive our gifts, no matter what they are today, in the name and the love of our Christ.
Whatever you do to the least ones of these, I tell you in truth that you do unto me. Lord Jesus, you taught us, may we learn on you, that when we serve others, we also serve you. When poor waiting children pray, hunger will end. When those long forgotten cry out for a friend. When thirsty ones whisper, "Oh Lord, where are you?" We hear in their longing that you're calling to. Lord, when did we see you? Your teaching is clear, that when we serve others, we're serving you here. And when your church heeds you and helps us in faith, then out of the chaos, hope rises again. God of great and God of small, God of one and God of all, God of weak and God of strong, God to whom all things belong. Hallelujah, hallelujah, praise be to your name. God of land and sky and sea, God of life and destiny, God of never-ending power, God whose something every hour. Hallelujah, hallelujah, praise be to your name. God of silence, God of sound, God by whom the lost are found, God of day and darkest night, God whose love turns wrong to right. Hallelujah, hallelujah, praise be to your name. God of heaven and God of earth, God of death and God of birth, God of now and days before, God who reigns forevermore. Hallelujah, hallelujah, praise be to your name.
O God, who gave us our advocate, our helper, we give you thanks for these gifts that you have given us. And we ask that as you have called us to be your own, we might be helpers in this world, that the world be healed and strengthened and given peace. Amen. Please be seated. Well, there's oodles and boodles of announcements today. The first one I should make is that next week on Saturday is the annual Bloom in May event. Pat, did you want to say anything about that? We can use cookies. And just come. Yeah, come and have lunch. The guys are cooking, right? All right, that sounds great. So that's coming up. Also, today is a special baby bottle drive right at the end of the sanctuary. Here are baby bottles. I kind of wondered when I came in what we were doing this morning. Thought maybe we had refreshments during church, but no. The baby bottles are so that you can fill them with your change, and they will go to the Mountain Star Relief Nursery. And if you need to know more about Mountain Star, if you're curious, Michelle, raise your hand. Michelle is on the board. You're not on the board, but she talks a lot. So, no. Did I say that out loud? Oops. She spoke at the luncheon is what I meant. Okay. Anyway, she knows a lot about it, it's just one of the most amazing organizations I think I've ever been acquainted with. Also, we are also gathering items for our birthing kits that we're going to send to UMCOR. I don't even know if they immediately need these or not, but when I think of Mother's Day, I think of women who have to give birth out of doors. And I just think this is something that we can do in an amazing way. So what else is going on here? We've got lots and lots happening. Blood drive this week. And there's other announcements, probably. Any other things I'm forgetting? Because I think I am. Yes.
I have one.
Yes.
So next Saturday, in addition to the Bloom in May, between 10 and noon in Bend, there is it's kind of a ministry fair kind of thing. The deacons of the United Methodist Church in our annual conference are putting together these talks where people who are interested in ministry, whether it's ordained, some type of local licensed pastor, there will be representatives from each of the categories. If you feel called to lead in the church in some way, I will be the deacon representative there. It's at the Bend United Methodist Church from 10 to noon next Saturday.
Okay. Alrighty. I know what one of the other things was. Next week, we're going to be receiving new members. So if you've just been dying to join this community of faith, please come and talk to me after church. And we're going to have a confirmation. I won't tell you who she is, but she's sitting in the front row. Pat. Okay, awesome. It's already been. That's fabulous. Okay, and it's what time? 9:30? 9:30 here at the church. That sounds good.
I have an announcement also, just a reminder that if you're interested in taking a calligraphy class, I'm going to be teaching it right after church beginning in June. I need to have you sign up on the clipboard in the office or let me know so that I have enough pens and equipment for you. So
Yay.
no charge
Okay.
except to pay for the pens.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, we have a God moment this week. Anyone would like to share? A God moment of the day. I just had so many I don't know what to share. If you haven't seen it yet, go to our Facebook page because we got Bomba socks this week. We also have a video of us receiving those Bomba socks, and you won't want to miss that either because I had 444 pairs of socks thrown on my head. And Bombas, I just want to share with you because you'll be learning more about this later, is an organization started by a couple guys less than 10 years ago who decided they wanted to do something that would help the world. So they decided to redesign socks because they thought socks needed an overhaul anyway. And they designed some socks that were great socks, and for every pair of socks that they sell, they give one pair away. That is a lot of socks. So far, they've given well over 4 million socks away. And we are the recipients. I have done this before, but I wrote a grant asking them for our community to get socks. And I didn't even ask them for an amount, and they gave us over 400. of multicolored socks. So those will be going out into a variety of places in the community real soon. So that was a terrific God moment for me this week. Anybody else have a God moment? Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Wonderful. Our building was used to receive a Hispanic couple had a wedding here last night, and they had a wonderful time. And thank you for facilities team for making that easier for them to do. So that's good. Anybody else?
Nancy, I have one too.
Sure.
Last night I was up in Portland for a dinner. I was invited as a mentor of one of the medical students, Lynn Booth, who had come and worked with us. And so this was a dinner for students that are graduating this spring from OHSU, who are going into residencies in family medicine. And there was about 20 to 25 students, which is a big group for this class. And at that dinner, there was an opportunity. They went around, and at each table, the students were sitting with the mentors that they had invited. And so the students stood up and talked about the people that had mentored them, and then the mentors stood up and talked about the students, which, as you can imagine, went on for a long time. But it was really neat to hear the stories of how somebody's life had been touched, both by the mentors and the mentees. And so hearing you talk about looking for the helpers, that you never know whose life you're going to touch in a positive way and turn their life in a new direction. So it was really a powerful evening.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think sometimes we forget about how important those moments are. So here's your homework. Thanks for giving me homework for everybody, Gary. Here's your homework. If you think of one of those helpers in your life, you might not even know them really well, write them a note this week. Write them a note, because I know how important those notes are. So if you can think of somebody who has been a helper in your life or in someone else's life, write them the note this week. Would you stand?
As we go, may your spirit go before us. As we go, may we follow where you lead. May we live what we have learned, share the message we have heard, and be a light unto the world as we go. As we go, may your spirit go before us. As we go, may we follow where you lead. May we live what we have learned, share the message we have heard, and be a light unto the world as we go. As we go, may your spirit go before us. As we go, may we follow where you lead. May we live what we have learned, share the message we have heard, and be a light unto the world as we
So as we go today, a mistake in the bulletin. It's not the UMW that's doing refreshments, in case the UMW has now panicked. But we do have refreshments from Pat and I think Kathy. So please do join us after the service. Next week is Pentecost, and you know what that means? Wear your red. Get your red on. Invite friends, family, whomever. The sanctuary is going to be gorgeous, I know, and I'm looking forward to it. And so, go forth in peace, in the love, the power, and the kindness of Christ to be God's helpers in this place and in the world. Amen.
be your name. Every blessing you pour out, turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will sing. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Blessed be your name. The sun shining down on me. The world's all as it should be. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name. On the road marked with suffering, the fading me harmony. Blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out, turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. You give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will just say,
Father's Day
Lord,
was
blessed be your name. You give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be